Here's a great idea for your next outing. A cruise of the L.A. Harbor on a Spirit Cruises yacht. Spirit Cruises offers everything you need to relax and enjoy your time on the water. For more information, call 310-548-8080 or visit spiritmarine.com.
Welcome to the Thrashpie Radio Podcasts. Now, we're gearing up to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the launch of the Pure Rock format on KNAC-FM, which happened January 8th, 1986. We've gotten a glimpse into how a few of us, that is the air staff, how we heard about it and then got involved at the station, and also why. So Long Paul and Gonzo Greg and the Razor and me.
Thrashpie, our favorite guy.
We were the public figures. This podcast will feature parts of the interviews I did with sales manager Nicki Randolph and program director Jimmy the Armored St. Christopher. They were two of the big players in what would be Pure Rock KNAC's historic launch. Now, for many of us, and me included, the Pure Rock era of KNAC is really all we know. But let it be known that there was life before Pure Rock, and KNAC has quite a pedigree in rock radio. Though it must be said the station, while functional as an album rock station, was described by program director Jimmy Christopher, who worked for then PD Paul Four, this way.
Kind of like a poor man's KLOS or even KMET. You know, at the time, KMET was the top album-oriented rock station. And because KNAC was one of the original AOR stations back in the back in the 60s when the Jim and Claudia Harden bought it. And that's when Jim Ladd got his start, too. He was at KNAC for many years before he progressed to KLOS and became, Jim Ladd. Denise Westwood was there, I remember, at that time. And Norm McBride, who was the morning man. Sylvia Amarito, who to this day is still on L.A. radio. And so it was a great staff. And, Paul was great, and especially for hiring me. Paul left, and I became the program director, and that's when basically the development of rock and rhythm occurred.
There were some L.A. radio greats who spent time at KNAC in the early days, but the station just couldn't break out of the pack. Now, granted, it had signal limitations and very little resources, but it seemed like KNAC just wasn't innovative enough. Album rock radio was the status quo by the late 70s, and just another slight variation of the same old thing couldn't bring KNAC out of the doldrums. So bring on the rock and rhythm era, which was Jimmy Christopher's baby.
Great format and great people. You mentioned Nicki Randolph, and she and I were like brother and sister in a professional business way. And we basically ran that station for a number of years when it went bankrupt. When the Hardens got rid of it, they brought in the Wright brothers out of Cleveland, Ohio, and not Orville and Wilbur. And they were great people, too. They came in, bought it from the Hardens. And that's when we contrived the idea of having a pledge to save the station, because we didn't know what the hell was going to go on with the station. We didn't know if it was going to, if they're going to sell it because it was bankrupt, if it was going to turn Hispanic, if it was going to go dark. We didn't know. We wanted to save our beloved format, so we developed this pledge format to save KNAC. And, gosh, we had everything. We had baseballs from baseball players signed, panties, surfboards. I mean, you name it. It was just, I remember some great shots of Music Connection had printed of Mary Jo Godges, who was my music director at that time, sitting just literally a sea of letters and pledges of all sorts.
Money problems, a lack of leadership maybe lack of focus, stumbling along, bankrupt and rudderless. Suddenly the clouds parted and the radio gods smiled on KNAC, and an unlikely savior, an L.A. real estate mogul, appeared.
Fred Sands bought the station in 1984, it was, and he brought in Gary Price. Great man, great GM, looked like Walter Matthau, a great sense of humor.
Oh, yeah.
He was a big football fan. We'd go to lunch and talk about radio, and then he'd ask me, I think the Raiders are going to cover the spread this week against the Bengals.
Oh, yeah, I went to some Raiders games with him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you know Gary. And
oh, yeah.
Sometime toward the end of 1985, Gary and I, at one of our lunches or one of our meetings, started, tossing around, looking for niches, because we love the rock and rhythm format, but we were doing a .4, billing like $500,000, which it wasn't bad then in the middle 80s, but, where you're looking for another niche format to really kick that thing in the rear and just, get it up to, a one share.
Now that name, Gary Price, our general manager, is a name that we're going to hear many, many times in the podcasts in the near future and in the long-form audio documentary to be heard on laradiostudio.com. Now, Gary was our master of puppets, and I mean that in the best way, and I plan to dedicate a whole podcast to him. Nicki Randolph was also an instrumental person in the founding of Pure Rock KNAC. Only her second job in radio, she'd risen to general sales manager under Gary Price. It was Nicki's job to keep the revenue stream alive, but to do so was becoming more and more difficult. And so it became more and more apparent that change was in the wind.
I would have weekly sales meetings with Gary, and he'd be like, wow, we're really not making much money here. We're like a college station, and, this is not working for the owner, and we got to do something different, and so on. So one day he says to me, these artists like Ronnie James Dio and Ozzy Osbourne are still selling out stadiums, but no one plays their music anymore. I just looked at him like, you got to be crazy. You're talking about heavy metal. He goes, yeah, I think we should, do something with heavy metal.
I think we should do something with heavy metal. It almost sounds funny now, knowing the KNAC history that we do. As always, many thanks to the king of radio show producers, Mike Stark, for encouragement, guidance, and the use of his incredible LA radio studio here on the main channel of the Los Angeles Harbor. These Thrashpie Radio Podcasts are meant to pave the way for the 2-hour live streaming event celebrating the 30th anniversary of the launch of the Pure Rock format at KNAC-FM. So make plans to join us. The KNAC family, traveling from far and wide to be here, will be underway at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, Friday, January 8th, 2016. This year, this week. In the coming days and weeks, you're going to hear more from KNAC insiders on our favorite station. Music director Ross Goza, promotion director Tom Marr, and other notables, Tom Marshall, Brian Schock, The Razor. And they're all talking about our favorite radio subject, KNAC, the little bitty radio station with the big old 1,000-watt throbbing transmitter. So join me again for another Thrashpie Radio Podcast.